Well, welcome everybody. My name is Janet Clinton and it's my honour to welcome you all and commence this book launch. What I'd like to do is to start with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our lands and pay my respects to our elders past, present and future on all the lands that we may be coming from today. I would also like to acknowledge that this is an incredibly auspicious occasion. Not only are we launching a book, but it is the International Women's Day. And for those of you who are sharing this launch seminar with us, there are many of you that would be going, wow, a day to celebrate women. For somebody who's been an academic for many, many years, I can tell you that each year we have this celebration. I'm in awe of the fact that we got to a point where we are now. Today, we're going to launch a book in the series that relates to thriving and surviving academia. And what's amazing about this particular book is the fact that we have a group of women who are coming together to tell their personal stories. And with the hope that we and our future generations will all learn from these stories. Personally, I can share with you, I have 4 grandchildren, all girls, which is the delight of my life. And it is my dream that some of them will choose to be academics, or choose to be researchers, or choose to be teachers. And as they go through their career, the idea that there is an element of hindering their career, their ingenuity, their innovation would be totally foreign to them in the world as they grow up. This is what this book is about from my perspective. It is about women thriving generally, but thriving in academia, so that our knowledge, our experiences are all contributing to the global challenges that we have. Thriving, from my perspective, means that more and more women are working in an academic environment, are leading in the academic world, are sitting around the table making decisions about our global future, are winning enormous grants, are recognised for their great contribution. The women that you are going to hear from today are all leaders in this space. These are all women that have shared their personal experience. So as we move forward, what I'd like to do is to acknowledge all the women that are presenting today, all the women that are here. And thank you for taking up the challenge, for choosing your particular challenge and adding to this great puzzle so that our future children, our future women can continue to flourish and thrive and contribute to the academic space. What I'd like to do is to pay particular respect and to celebrate somebody who's very close to our MGSE heart and part of our family. And this is Dr. Mariam Mahat, who is a senior research fellow at the University of Melbourne in MGSE. Now, what I can tell you about Mariam is that she is one of our greatest contributors. She comes to MGSE with great tenacity and with great ability to engage and to bring people together. As a Deputy Dean who is involved in staffing, I can tell you that Marion is everywhere. Marion is researching, Marion is contributing to her colleagues, and Marion is working extremely hard in the research space and contributing to the future of women around the world. And from MGSE's perspective, we're delighted that we're able to host this book launch today. These things don't happen with just one person. The whole series is a range of women. And if you think about the women that you're going to listen to and hear their personal stories today, there are lessons for us all. Most importantly, they've come together to collaborate and to share a vision for the future. And a part of that has been the work of Kim Chadwick, who is the senior commissioning editor for this book, for this series. And so what's going to happen as we go through our book launch is you're going to hear from Kim briefly. We're then going to bring in Marion, who's going to moderate discussions from each of the authors. And then there'll be a series of discussions and questions. So we're really delighted that you can spend the time with us today. We hope that you, like many of us, learn from the stories and the discussions that follow from this book in this magic series. So once again, as you think about this afternoon, welcome for joining us. Thank you for coming, and happy Women's Day. Kim, can I hand over to you?
You can. Thank you so much, Janet, for that introduction, and for kicking us off today. So good afternoon or good morning from my perspective. I'm here in England, where it's a very bright and early 5 a.m. But I'm delighted to join everyone here today. And like Janet said, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to the series which this book is publishing as part of. So as Janet mentioned, I'm senior commissioning editor at Emerald Publishing, a publishing company for this book. And I first met Marion about 4 years ago in Texas, of all places, at the American Educational Research Association conference. And not long after that, we became very fast friends. And not long after that, we kind of had this idea for launching a series that would provide kind of people's personal experiences and journeys, and kind of supportive and encouraging contributions that would address some of the things that we all go through as part of the academy, or people go through as an academic, but you don't necessarily get kind of any formal training or support on. And so we launched the book a couple of years ago with this first book. I don't know if it's going to work with the green screen, but with this first book, which was all about going for your first academic promotion, or even some of the chapters just focused on going for your first position postdoctorate. And this is a really fantastic book, and it kind of set the tone for what the rest of the series has become, which is really international perspectives with people's personal experiences, focusing on the surviving of academia, but not glossing over what the challenges and a lot of the hurdles can be, particularly in this book, but also really celebrating the thriving, really celebrating people's success stories, and people's own personal journeys. And the hope is that with any chapters in any of the book, but particularly with the book we're launching today, Women Thriving in Academia, that anybody reading it could be feel supported and encouraged by it. And although the journeys won't look exactly the same as theirs, because everybody's is different, they will hopefully see tenets or elements in the contributors' kind of stories and experiences which relate to their own, which will encourage them to kind of carry on in their journey of academia, and encourage them to know that they can achieve just as much as anybody else and not be hindered by the fact that they are a woman. So with that, I will hand over to Marion to kick us off properly.
Thank you, Janet and Kim, for the wonderful opening remarks. As introduced by Janet, my name is Dr. Marion Mahat, and I am a Senior Research Fellow at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. I welcome all of you to the launch of this book, acknowledging that each one of you have come from far and wide and across multiple time zones. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land that I am standing on, that is Melbourne, Australia. And I would also like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to any Indigenous present. While my research focuses on student learning and outcomes in different educational and learning environment contexts, I'm also passionate about building capacity and capability of graduate and early career academics. The Surviving and Thriving in Academia book series draw on real-life examples and insights, and offers practical advice and strategies for those navigating the many challenges, responsibilities, and opportunities of academic careers. Women Thriving in Academia was not born out of strong ideological feminist ideas or with grand aims to change the system. It was conceived as a celebration of how far women have come and continue to thrive in the pursuit of research, education, and scholarship despite the many challenges. For many decades, women in academia have worked hard to achieve not only work-life balance, juggling professional and domestic responsibilities, but while also thriving in academia. The COVID-19 pandemic is magnifying this already fractured landscape, and its impact has manifested itself in far-reaching and unimaginable ways. COVID-19 has not only highlighted privileges, but also amplified the mental, physical, social, and economic impacts attributable to pre-existing inequities in academia, as well as favoring biased decision-making processes. Against this backdrop, change will be harder to achieve than ever before. Maybe one day in the very distant future, the higher education system will transform so that there's equality, equity, and fairness in access and opportunities for all, regardless of gender and creed. In the meantime, I hope this book offers some strategies for thriving for the modern female academic. This book would not have been possible without the awe-inspiring women who have contributed to this book, and I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge every single one of them. Professor Lynn Goodwin from the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong, Dr. Rita Hardiman from the Melbourne Dental School at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Elizabeth Hartnell-Young from the University of Melbourne and co-founder of Honour a Woman, Professor Emerita Jane Den Hollander from Deakin University, Associate Professor Kate Howell from the School of Agriculture and Food at the University of Melbourne, Associate Professor Chin E. Loh from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, Dr. Adelina Matteo Babiano from the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Zukiswa Timonie Kakana from Gibbs Business School at the University of Pretoria, Professor Pauline Ross at the Faculty of Science in the University of Sydney, Dr. Kate Carides Thomas from Birmingham City University, and Dr. Emily Yarrow from the University of Portsmouth. My understanding of thriving in academia has benefited from a wide network of voices from around the world. So I thank you to each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. For our families who have stood behind us, cheering on every deadline, every late night, and every time away from home, so that we can continue to thrive. Thank you. For the two women in my life, my mom, who inspired me to thrive regardless of what life throws at me, and my daughter, who moved me to thrive not only as a mom and as an academic, but also as a person. Thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel for today's launch. Dr. Kate Carides Thomas, Birmingham City University, Professor Lynn Goodwin, University of Hong Kong, Professor Emerita Jane Den Hollander, Deakin University, and Dr. Zukiswa Timonie Kakana, University of Pretoria, Thank you all for being here, some as early as 5 a.m. in the morning. The panel will respond to a few questions to start the discussions going on the topic of thriving in academia before going to a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to post your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Perhaps if we could get everybody on the screen, please. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is what it means to thrive in academia. As a former Vice Chancellor of Deakin University, Jane, perhaps you would like to respond to that first question.
Well, thank you very much, Marion. And of course, to everyone, International Women's Day, to our mothers and our grandmothers, we say thank you. What kind words you said. How to thrive in academia. As someone who's come out the other end and I've retired, I've got 3 points, and I'll say them quickly. The first one is training. My friends, get as much training as you can. Can you hear me? I think you can hear me. You can hear me. Get as much training as you can. Always do the training that is offered, wherever it is, so that you get confidence in your capacity to communicate and to be confident in the words that you say. The second thing is never give up. You may not get that first job, and I'm famous for telling the stories the first story when I didn't get a really big job and actually shouted at the Deputy Vice Chancellor and slammed the door going out of his office, having to then buy him the most expensive bottle of wine in the shop and beg forgiveness. I felt bad after that, and you learn from those things. Never give up, try again, and learn from whatever it was that was the last thing. And then, of course, always be prepared. Now, women mostly are better prepared than our opposite genders, but make sure that you always prepare for whatever it is, because I've found, my view is that those who prepare are more confident going into the room. Do whatever it is that makes you happy to be confident. Thriving in academia is hard, but it's no difficult, and I note particularly the difficulty that our women elected representatives have had over the last 2 weeks in the federal government. Think about how they have to prepare to every day get up in the hostile environment they're in. Our environments may be slightly less hostile, but we need just as much preparation, and we do need to prepare for that with training and a capacity to be stoic and not to give up every time we get a good smack in the face. It will happen. Get past it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for your point of reflections as a leading and an established scholar. So from the other side of the coin, as an early career academic, Qiqi, what does it mean for you to thrive in academia?
Thank you, Marion, and a great pleasure to be in this conversation. So a couple of things, and I'm inspired already by the words we've heard this morning around just preparing, which is especially important. But for me, thriving in academia means a couple of things. The first is around also establishing what your trusted network of people from whom you can ask for help is as early as possible. And you build that out over the tenure of your time. But certainly as an early stage academic myself, I think the opportunity, especially among colleagues and friends with whom I was a student through my own scholarly development, but also those that are your mentors and are available for that. So thriving for me is about establishing and identifying those people as early as possible. And it's been especially helpful to know that that is a trusted pool of people I can go to ask for feedback, to ask for input, but also to create opportunities with the experience that they have. So I think certainly that. And then probably one of the best words of advice I ever received was to always operate at the level towards which I'm aspiring, not my current level. And so as a doctoral student, not to operate as a researcher who's still a student, but to think of myself as a junior professor, or to think of myself as an associate professor, and thinking about the hierarchy of the academy in that way, of course, So as I get into a role of junior professor, start to operate at the next level of associate professor, be curious about what is the work and what differentiates the next level from where I currently am, and already see yourself in that. I often say there's no point being excellent in this place because you're already there. You're not going to become more of a doctor or more of a first year early stage professional. What you want to be is a middle stage, is to be experienced, is to be tenured, if that's what you aspire towards. So those are really the two things that have stood out for me. And then thirdly is about finding academic spaces that allow you to have a sense of belonging. So what does belonging mean? And how do you also contribute to spaces that are inclusive within the academy? Thank you.
Thanks, Qiqi. That's really, really good. But upon reflection then, how do you continue to thrive in a landscape of rejected papers and grants, missed opportunities and collaborations? Lynn, perhaps you might want to tell us, how do we get up and keep going each time?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think part of it is expecting that there will be, bumps in the road. There will be failures, that not everything you do will either be brilliant or seen as brilliant, even if it is. So I think that, managing, on the one hand, I agree with Qiqi, you have to kind of aspire to points above where you are. At the same time, you have to have a realistic sense of yourself and to manage your own expectations. So your expectations have to be aspirational. At the same time, you can't be crushed if there's a detour and you have to try again. Second, I think it's important to remember that a rejection certainly is not a rejection of you as a person, and there are many reasons for rejection. Sometimes you have, the conversation that you're part of doesn't align, with the conversation that you're trying to join. Or perhaps the journal that you've chosen is not exactly the right fit. Or perhaps the reviewer that you've hit just hates what you're doing. That happens all the time. You'll get, 2 great reviews that say you walk on water, and 1 review that says this is the worst trash ever. What do you do? It happens all the time. So I learned actually from a good colleague many, many years ago that a rejection the first time doesn't mean that your work isn't good, that what you should do is turn around and send it out again immediately. Because you cannot assume that the rejection is kind of an indication of weak work. One would hope that you never send out something that is weak. If it comes back a rejection a second time, then you should think about, what you need to do in order to revise. And the last thing I would say is I work with lots and lots of different teams. I work with all kinds of colleagues internationally. As a dean, I never have time to do any writing or research. And the only way I can manage to push myself forward is actually because I have colleagues who are pushing me and pulling me and bringing me along. And some of those colleagues are far junior to me in terms of age or experience, and others are far senior to me, also in terms of age or experience. So look out for your friends, build those networks, collaborate with others, and be open to collaborations from all different kinds of folks. I think this collaboration here is a good example. I was lucky enough that you reached out to me. We didn't know each other that well, but at the same time, I said yes. That's always my big strategy. Say yes to things. We have a tendency in the academy to advise, sort of junior folks or untenured folks to protect themselves and say no. And quite often, I think folks protect themselves into invisibility. So say yes, step up, reach out, don't be afraid. And if you have lots of things going on, one rejection, you can let that go because there are other things, that you're working on.
Thanks, Lynn. I will have to remember that next time I get a rejection. It's not personal. What about you, Kate? what keeps you thriving during these low moments?
Yeah, and I think it's been particularly difficult in the last year. I think what thriving means in the last year has changed as we've all been working from home, and many people have been undergoing an enormous challenges in terms of personal circumstances and coping, and so I think what's become most important to me, really, and in respect to my colleagues, is to maintain personal well-being and integrity during this time. I think one of the worst phrases I think that is alive in academia at the moment is publish or perish. I think it is the most unhelpful phrase for all of us at whatever stage we're at, but particularly for younger or newer academics. I've done a lot of work over this time with writing groups, online writing groups, and virtual writing groups programs where women are coming together. Female academics come together to just share virtual space and to write alongside each other. And that's been quite remarkable, actually. I think people have found that, well, I found that a really powerful way of, if you like, thriving, or actually more like surviving in academia this year. So I'd say there's probably 3 words which I prefer to publish or perish, and those are collegiality, feminism, and activism within the academy. It's hard to practice all of those every day, but I think I try and keep those in mind.
Thanks, Kate. Very important points there. And I agree, academia can be quite isolating and emotionally turbulent, particularly in the COVID-19 pandemic. So given the last year, how can we support ourselves, each other, and in our communities as well to thrive? Perhaps we could go back to you, Jane.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's been a difficult year. I like that comment, the previous speaker, about publish or perish. We've got to stop saying those sorts of things. It's absolute nonsense. And universities aren't just so one-dimensional. I think we have to connect locally, nationally, and globally. And one thing the pandemic has shown us is that we can connect with Zoom as we're doing now. And I think we've underestimated that capacity to reach out to people that around the world and have a glass of wine or a pizza online occasionally and discuss the issues of the day, whatever they are. I found that really useful. I moved to Perth just before the pandemic. It's my hometown, but I haven't lived here for years and years. And so it was quite isolating because you couldn't get connected. So I went on Zoom and I stayed connected with my friends and my colleagues in what is a difficult time. And I'll probably keep doing that, even though soon we can all get outside and do the things that we've normally done. So that's one thing that I've found in this whole period we've been through. Great. The thing that I find most disappointing from the years that we've worked so hard to get women representation in academia is how many people have lost their jobs. And over the last year in the pandemic, casualisation, the scourge that it is, has impacted women more than men. And we do need to now, as we come back into the sunshine and vaccinations, is get better focused on getting those women back into academia, back into those jobs. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks. And drawing from your work with Athena Swan, Kate, how can we support ourselves and other women navigating this isolating and emotionally turbulent higher education environment?
Well, that's quite a big ask. I'm not sure Athena Swan necessarily has all the answers. Athena Swan is a very useful framework. It makes us ask questions of our institutions and of our practices. And sometimes I think just having to ask the question is a powerful act, really, and can bring surprising data into the light. I think visibility is hugely important. As the chapter I wrote in the book was about a festival that I run, not necessarily every year, but I have run for the last 2 years, and I am running again this year, marking International Women's Day within the university. And I'm always really careful to use the word mark instead of celebrate, because increasingly I feel I don't feel like celebrating. And COVID has exposed the structural continuing inequalities that women face in all aspects of their lives. But not to be a downer on this day, I think that what's good this year is that people wanted to run aspects of the festival. They wanted to come together to discuss, to talk about, their lives in higher education or their research that they're doing. I think we have to take pleasure in the work that we do. We do it because it means a lot to us, because it's amazing to be in this position where we can always be learning and finding out new things. And so I think, taking pleasure in our own work and that of others. As I said, I also run these online writing groups, and 2 hours a week I have found for many women during this time have been really, really powerful opportunities just to connect, to share challenges, to share the common issues, particularly that Lynn talked about with publishing. So it doesn't always have to be big flag waving. It's what we do in the small spaces as well.
Thanks, Kate. Before we head into the Q&A, if I could get each one of you to share with us one piece of advice or strategy that has helped you and can help others thrive in academia. Let's start with you, Lynn. Could have one advice or one strategy for all of those people listening in today.
Only one. Oh my goodness, the pressure. I think for me, I would say show up, participate. I think so often, especially now, because we're overwhelmed with webinars and online conversations and what have you, that it's easy to just sort of hit delete. It's easy to feel, and this is, before COVID and before everything was online, to say, oh, I'm too busy. If I lock myself in my office for another hour, for that hour, I can churn something out, as opposed to wasting time to, join some meeting or conversation or exploration or what have you. And my advice is go, because that's how you make connections. That's how you become visible. That's how you find out what's going on. That's where you hear interesting ideas that you might connect to. So show up, raise your hand, and speak up. There's a question in the Q&A about, how do you find writing groups? Part of it is actually through showing up, because that's how you meet other people. And suddenly you find that you're having a conversation with someone who shares your interests. And from that group of 2, it becomes 3. And before you know it, you've been writing together and talking for several years. So those small spaces that Kate talks about are really important. And the last thing I'll say is show up for other people. Invite others into the conversation. Look out for the folks who are around you who may not be part of your network, but bring them in, because that is one of the most sort of, if we talk about feminist moves, it's not about marching with a sign. It's about, empowering and advocating for other women.
Thanks, Lynn. How about you, Zuki? One advice, a strategy that has helped you thrive in academia?
Sure. It's beautiful pearls of wisdom already, but as I was thinking about this question, what came to mind for me, I think, is an experience I'm growing into, which is around building what is now commonly called a portfolio lifestyle in your academic career. And it's often spoken about in the sense of have multiple jobs or professions that you have. But I think it's useful, especially for early stage scholars, to think of your academic and your growth within the academy as a portfolio lifestyle, which means don't funnel yourself into a single stream. I'm a scholar in leadership, I'm a scholar in statistics, but look widely for where else you can contribute meaningfully, because that's also how your portfolio grows. And sometimes collaborations come from the most unlikely places because of that perspective of being wide open to the most unlikely. So seek collaborations, be curious about what other deans, other schools within your college or university are doing and how that might contribute to your own excellence. And in that sense, think of yourself as a researcher, a teacher, a mentor, a student. And so that's what I mean by have a portfolio lifestyle approach to your growth and your work within the academy.
Thanks, Qiqi. And Kate, one piece of advice or strategy that has helped you thrive in academia?
Yes, it's a very practical. It's a very practical one, and it was given to me by my colleague Professor Jacqueline Stevenson at the University of Leeds, and I came quite late to academia, and the whole idea of publishing and starting to get stuff out and ref and stuff was all quite overwhelming and intimidating. And she just suggested about having a publication plan, so that you identify your target journals, you identify what you would like to, what you're wanting to write, and you work through. You start with one and you send it off, and you give yourself a break, and then you immediately just get on with the next. Start getting on with the next thing. The publication process is so slow that you can't really afford to wait until you get your rejection or you get your revision back or whatever. So put your eggs in. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I think that's the phrase, isn't it? Have your eggs in many baskets and keep throwing them out there and hope they don't break. So yeah, have a plan. And again, echoing what Lynn said, rejection is part of it. So just have a strategic approach.
Thanks, Kate. Have a plan. And then finally, Jane, one piece of advice or strategy that has helped you thrive in academia?
Join things locally. Be part of your local community, wherever that university or institution is, I think is very important. Pull those younger or less qualified than you on the academic ladder up to upper level, and then look outside your own little patch and get to know people. The one thing that helped my career was getting to know people, and then a couple of them becoming very strong and powerful mentors because of the connections that I've made. It is terrifying to approach someone who seems to be way above you in the stratosphere, but women very rarely say no. They just don't get asked very often. I was interested in a recent thing I did on mentoring, that more men get asked to mentor than women do. If I would say one thing to all of you, go out, find people who look like you in some way, in terms of the interests you have, the places you want to be, the kind of thing you want to do, and ask them if they give you an hour every 3 months to just talk through what your anxiety or questions are that day. Get a mentor. Ask someone. They won't offer it because we're all humble in the end. Ask someone and see what they say.
Thanks, Jane. Ask a mentor. I'll keep that in mind as well. Thank you, everybody, for all your insights and reflections and for sharing with us your stories of resilience and thriving. For many centuries, women academics have thrived regardless of the system, the rules, and the challenges and barriers in academia. Women have developed the capacity to perceive their personal and professional life through a lens of possibilities, opportunities, and prospects, rather than through a filter of obstacles and limitations. Women have thrived in academia, look for why things can transpire, like all these wonderful women here today, and not on why they cannot. They have developed the ability to be present to what is happening in the moment, rather than agonizing about the future or musings over the past. Drawing on philosophies of positive psychology, the chapters in this book individually and collectively provide a strength-based perspective, focusing on the inherent strengths and capabilities of academic women who can transform the lives of individuals in positive ways. The narratives in each chapter seek to deploy personal strength to support and encourage empowerment and growth to other women. They provide strength-based ruminations of leadership, of management, and of gender issues that are current and valid in academia today. Despite the daunting social, cultural, and historical complexities and academic contexts, these stories provide evidence that women can and will continue to thrive in academia. Thanks, everybody. Let's take our first question, if there are any questions in our Q&A. I think Lynn did respond to the first one about how we can find such groups for discussion about writing. Kate might want to offer her network groups as well for writing. But the second question is, what advice would you give to young researchers in terms of establishing collaboration, in terms of reaching out for help or guidance? Jane, given that you answered that last question on mentoring, perhaps you can take this question.
Yep, I think, right. I think a mentor and then getting known. You can lock yourself in your office or wherever you are and just work all day. But getting to know other people so that you can share makes for a better person in the end. So getting a mentor and getting out is important. Don't get sucked in by publish or perish. Think about yourself as a holistic person would be my advice, and get involved in the university. You know, I know the academic board or the Senate is a terrifying, dreadful place that most academics hate. Go there for one term and learn about the machinery of government that is a university, wherever you are. Learn from that so that your political understanding of the pathway through the maze is better. Get yourself a mentor to help you do some of that, will be just as useful. Always look in, I think, and see what the university or the place you're in is doing and how you might offer one thing to change the culture, to improve the culture for those coming after you.
Thanks, Jen. The next question is around COVID. How can COVID has negatively impacted university funding and its whole environment? How can women, both staff and students, turn this challenge to their advantage? Anybody would like to take that question? Lynn?
Now, I had a funny feeling that you would turn to me for that, and I'm thinking, what on earth can I say? You know, it's a very tough situation. I mean, without a doubt, we are experiencing something that is highly, highly unusual. But in some sense, there are always crises going on. As Jane said, women are more vulnerable all the time to layoffs, to hiring freezes, to be less likely to be chosen. So then the question becomes, if we think about the fact that we may be in a particular circumstance now, but in some ways it is not new for women to have more of the child care and you know, just sort of caring responsibilities in the home, more of the housekeeping responsibilities in the university. So how do we sort of work in solidarity with each other to learn how to say no to certain things? I said earlier to say yes, but sometimes it's important, you know, to learn how to say no, to not always be the person who has to do the organizing and take care of the logistics and manage childcare and what have you, to speak out and say there have to be ways in which we can share this equitably, to point out the fact that every time note-taking is happening, surprisingly, it ends up being, for the most part, a woman, particularly a junior scholar in the university, if we're talking about a university setting. The other thing about, about COVID is that because of COVID, there is now, all kinds of new funding that is focused on questions and issues and experiences around the crisis that we are undergoing. So on the one hand, things are being taken away. On the other hand, there are new things happening. So to look out, for those opportunities and to go for them.
Yep. Yeah, there are. I agree. There are opportunities out there that we can try to leverage from during this time. The next question for Marie is building off Zuki's suggestion of going wide with your portfolio and Kate's suggestion about not putting all your publishing eggs in one basket. Would you suggest spending energy on trying to publish in more popular, less academic op-ed spaces as well as in journals? Does building more activist community relationships help life in academia? I'll grab both Zuki and Kate to actually respond to this question, perhaps. You want to start off with it, Kate?
Yeah, sure. I think it depends who you are and what you want to achieve, and also what your discipline kind of expects of you. For me personally, publishing outside the conventional spaces and in ways that are not the conventional academic journal article has become absolutely affirming and developmental for me as an academic. I happen to be able to draw, and I happen to be able to write poetry. So I've brought that into my research. It doesn't count for the Research Excellence Framework. So it doesn't do me any favors as a conventional academic, but it has very much widened my audiences, and it widens my sense of what I do and why I do it. That's not going to work for everybody. If I was a chemist, that wouldn't be appropriate, I guess. So I guess, like other people have said, learn from those around you, take advice from those around you, and mentors, etc. And be conscious of why you're doing what you're doing, and therefore what's right for you.
Thanks, Kate. How about Zuki? Zuki, did you have a response for the question?
Sure. What I'd add to what Kate said as well is that timing, I think, is very important in terms of timing in your career trajectory. And I would strongly advocate for investing oneself in the earlier days and the earlier stages of your academic career in publishing in the academic journals and the places that are most important. For you to start to carve out an area, to build out your scholarship, but also to carve out an area of expertise among colleagues within your field. And that becomes a great building point as you then grow forward to then start moving out into the more public and advocacy types of publications. And to echo what Kate has said, for me personally, it's been because I work in business school scholarship, and just the proximity to business and the rapid changes that are happening in organizations and in business, in the emerging economies especially, I found the opportunity to be able to build from the academic publications to then have more practitioner type of conversations in the less academic publications. And now increasingly we're all being invited into all sorts of virtual events and so on. And it becomes easier to participate and even be invited and participate in those kinds of spaces when you've got the depth and the foundation from the academy and the scholarly publications initially. So the timing is important. But broadly, Maria, I think that the answer is certainly there's huge opportunity and very little to be lost in broadening your eggs, in, so to speak, into the more activist type of publication and literature places.
Thanks, Zuki. There are all these questions coming in, just a little bit overwhelmed as well. There's a question from Gloria about how to choose research options, and I think for Gloria, just a simple advice from me is to follow your passion. You know, you need to read a lot and find out what you're actually interested in, and that's how you find your research options for your master's study. There's a question from Emily. Hi, Emily, one of our contributors from the book. She says, thank you for fantastic insights so far. The gender pay gap is still rampant around the world and in most universities. How would you recommend tackling this at a personal level without being seen as a troublemaker? Zuki, since you're up, maybe you can answer this one. We don't want to be seen as a troublemaker, but we just want a pay rise. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, look, troublemaker is not a bad reputation to have if it's achieving social change. And the only way we are going to get gender parity is to be disruptive about it. I think many who've come before us had tried to be, what shall I say, politically proper about it, and there hasn't been any shift. And so I definitely think being a troublemaker in a sense, but in the sense of being disruptive to the status quo is especially important. That said, I think a lot of the professors, especially who are more experienced, have spoken repeatedly about having both a sense of yourself, and I think locating yourself within where do I find myself? What are the powers that are at play? What are the dynamics that are at play within this place, and where do I want to locate myself in the change and the discourse within the place that I find myself? So it's a little bit of just reading the room, as it were, and then figuring out where you want to locate yourself in what remains an important social change and disruptive agenda that we all ought to be pursuing.
Thanks, Zuki. That's a great response to that question. There's one here that I think perhaps I'll give to Lynn to respond, of saying yes and saying no dichotomy. Anonymous, I work in a male-dominated field and often asked to participate in recruitment panels. On the one hand, it can be a privilege, but on the other hand, it's a bit of a service burden on women in academia. I often feel like I'm not getting opportunities to get my research work done. Do you have any advice for managing this service responsibility, Lynn? How do you say yes on one hand and then no on the other hand?
Right. So I think that there is always the burden of diversity, that you end up being, sort of asked to do all kinds of extra work because you bring a valuable perspective, but then it means that other people can kind of sit back because you are there to represent, so to speak. So I think part of it is making decisions about when your service can actually make a difference that will ultimately help you. So for instance, being on search panels is actually very critical because for me, I think that one of the most important things we do as academics is making decisions about who joins our community. And quite often, if depending on who's on the search panel, the same kinds of folks end up being selected every single time, so that your presence as a woman, as a person of color, as a first generation, there's so many different ways in which diversity needs to be part of the decision. But there are other times, well, not other times, but in addition to that, to say out loud, wait a second, we need to think about diversifying search panels in general. So how can we sort of, as a community, start to think about this? And if the usual response of, we tried and they're not there, comes back, to say, they are there, but we need to, sort of expand the invitations, and maybe think about students being part of search panels, maybe think about community members being part of search panels, because the nature of the conversation changes all the time. a mentor of mine who continues to be a great friend and support, said she taught me how to sort of speak truth to power and to stand on my own in a position. And even as a junior untenured faculty member who was asked over and over again to sort of rubber stamp, dissertations. And the first time I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I was pressured to then do all the work in order to make the dissertation presentable. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because this is not my dissertation. And it was very, very hard to do. But two things happened. One was I stopped being invited because they didn't want that no. But the second was after I was able to do it the first time, a second time, a 10th time, I say this in my chapter, after a while it feels quite okay to be able to do that. And the last thing I would say is as a person of, sort of multiple positions and positionalities, I've learned that the first person to speak quite often controls the conversation. So to set the agenda right away, if you're on a search panel or a dissertation or in a committee, if you're going to do that service and you feel as though you can't say no, make your voice count.
Thanks, Lynn. That's a good note to finish off for today's launch. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to answer any more questions. So I am happy to take on any questions if you'd like to email me personally. And I think all the women on this panel today are open to questions if you want to email them personally too. On behalf of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education and the University of Melbourne, I would like to thank Professor Lynn Goodwin, Dr. Kate Careless-Thomas, Professor Jane Den Hollander, and Dr. Zukiswa Tibonye-Kakana for being here today on International Women's Day to launch the Women Thriving in Academia. Thank you, everybody, and a happy International Women's Day.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.